All right. What's up, everybody? My people in Manhattan, the Bronx, Queens, all to Staten Island, my homeboro, Brooklyn. Back out with another video. And obviously, we got some breaking news out of the NBA. The Los Angeles Clippers are nearing a deal to send Kawhi Leonard to the Toronto Raptors for Brandon Ingram, Grady Dick, 2 first-round picks, 1 pick swap, and 2 second-rounders, sources tell ESPN. A return to Canada for the Raptors champion and 2-time Finals MVP. Kawhi Leonard is going back to the Six. And like I said, he led them back in the 2018-19 season. He led them to their first and only NBA Finals appearance and NBA Finals championship, defeating the Golden State Warriors to cap off a legendary playoff run for Kawhi Leonard. You know, Kawhi and the Raptors were fun to watch in the playoffs that year. That playoff was fun to watch, and Kawhi's greatness was a big reason why. You know, hindsight is 2020. Kawhi Leonard should have never left the Toronto Raptors. He should have stayed there, try to run it back with that squad, see if they could go back to back. And I know the pandemic happened, but they only won one championship. And normally teams that win one championship, they kind of get forgotten in NBA history. Teams like the 83 76ers, one of the most dominant playoff teams of all time, one of the most dominant teams ever. They swept the Showtime Lakers in the playoffs, and people barely mention them. And that was a team with Dr. J. And they were in Philadelphia, one of the biggest markets in the country. But, they get forgotten. Teams like them, teams like the 04 Pistons. I mean, the 04 Pistons are kind of remembered, but they're really remembered because that was, quote-unquote, the greatest upset in finals history. And it was the end of Shaq and Kobe. That's kind of why they get remembered. The 2011 Mavericks, they get remembered because they defeated the Miami Heat. We remember that because, LeBron James had the biggest superstar meltdown of any superstar in finals history, as Skip Bayless would say. So, unfortunately, I believe the 2019 Raptors they're kind of becoming a forgotten team, but they were a great team, especially defensively, man. Kawhi Leonard, Pascal Siakam, Marc Gasol. Even though Marc Gasol was older, he was a former Defensive Player of the Year. Of course, we know Kawhi's greatness on defense. And they defeated the Golden State Warriors. And yes, I know Kevin Durant got hurt, and as did Klay Thompson. The Warriors weren't at 100%. If the Warriors were 100%, could they have beaten the Raptors? Probably, probably more than likely they would have. But things happen. They got hurt, and the Raptors won. Hats off to them. After the season, Kawhi, of course, went to the Clippers, and the Clippers and OKC agreed to I believe, a sign and trade. Wasn't it a sign and trade to get Paul George, or they just flat out trade him? I can't remember. Of course, that ended up sending Shai Gilgeous-Alexander to the Thunder, and we see how that's worked out for the Thunder. And a lot of people, including myself, thought the Clippers could have won the championship that year. It was going to be the Clippers versus – everybody was paying attention for the Clippers versus the Lakers. Because, of course, Anthony Davis had just got traded to the Lakers, and it was LeBron and AD against Kawhi and Paul George for who's the king of L.A., Battle of L.A. And, then the pandemic happened. And we saw in the bubble, the Clippers blew a 3-1 lead to the Nuggets, and they just weren't – the bubble really exploded. They weren't a real championship team. Paul George had mental weakness. Lou Williams, he had to go get some wings from a strip club. Doc Rivers was all emotional because remember, it's 2020. It's the year of Black Lives Matter and all this stuff. It was just a disaster. And, of course, Doc Rivers ended up getting fired and replaced with Ty Lue. And then the next year, 2021, they were playing great, and Kawhi's playing great, and then he gets hurt. I think he messed up his Achilles in the second round against the Utah Jazz, and he missed, obviously, the rest of the season, all of next season. And that was probably the Clippers' best chance to win a championship, and, of course, it didn't happen because of Kawhi's injury. The Clippers, talk about being a snake-bin franchise. You get a 2-time champion, a 2-time Finals MVP, a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, one of the top 75 players of all time, to willingly want to come to play for you and your franchise. And he brings another high-level star player with him. And Paul George was an MVP candidate. I remember his name being mentioned in the MVP conversation that 2018-19 season. So you get an MVP caliber player and, of course, a great player like Kawhi Leonard to your team that made the playoffs the year before. And just things happen. You still can't get it done. Like, damn, talk about being snake bitten. But now he's going back to Toronto. And look, this isn't the same Kawhi Leonard. Kawhi's 35 years old now. Kawhi honestly should just retire. No, a lot of NBA players should just honestly just retire. Guys like LeBron, and I know LeBron's more than likely going to go to Golden State. People like him and KD and Kyle Lowry and Kevin Love and Westbrook, all those guys who were drafted in the 2000s, they need to it's time for them to wrap it up, honestly. And Kawhi, of course, was drafted in 2011, but, he's 35, 36, 35 going on 36, however old he is. He's only getting older. He has an injury history. Like, he might as well just wrap it up, Guys, that's almost might as well wrap it up. But I was shocked by this. I was shocked by this. The Clippers are obviously blowing it up and going to try to rebuild with what they have. Guys, tell me in the comments if you're down below. Should Kawhi have ever left Toronto in the first place? Should he have stayed and try to go back to back? Because, again, teams like the 83 Sixers, the 2011 Mavericks, the 04 Pistons, they're kind of forgotten in NBA history, even though they were great teams on their own, especially the 83 Sixers. But teams who win multiple championships or, hell, repeat as champions, like the Bad Boy Pistons, the Clutch City Rockets. Of course, we know Shaq and Kobe three-peated. Jordan's Bulls three-peated twice. Magic's Lakers won 5 titles with 1 repeat. Bird Celtics, of course, they never repeated, but they did win, 3 championships in a 4 or 5 year stretch. The Spurs won multiple championships, and they won in 99, 03, 05, 07, then they won again in 2014. Of course, we know the Warriors, what the Warriors did over the last 10 years. Teams, and those teams that only win 1 championship, they unfortunately get forgotten. But teams who win, back-to-back or three-peat or win 3 in 5 years or 4 in 8 years, however how many years, they're remembered forever. Unfortunately, that 19 Raptors team is gonna be forgotten. So should Kawhi Leonard have stayed? And what do you think now? Do you think the Raptors are going to be a championship team this year? I highly doubt that. But hey, if you think that, let me know in the comment section down below. Don't forget to click like and subscribe. I'm going to grow on YouTube. And I'm going to see you all.